Okay. Sunblessed Vigor. Okay, well that is substantially worse than a...
Time for violence.
That's substantially worse than Pale Cascade. Pale Cascade would have been much more problematic for us. I mean, he still can block and kill that, but we put him down to 2. We drop him to a low health point. We keep our Misfortune, and Misfortune hits because he's greedy and trying to save this Zoe. Hey everyone, Gangplank here. Today we have another episode of On the Grind, the show where I cover a deck I'm playing in Ranked. I'll break down the deck, a couple of flex spots, and some basic mulligans. Then we'll put the deck through some ranked matches and review how we do afterwards. This week we'll be looking at Bilgewater Burn. Since it's been about 12 to 13 weeks or so since the last time I covered this deck, I'll be doing a full breakdown this time instead of last time where I just talked about the changes. For people who are unfamiliar with the deck, it's been around for quite a long time now, so I figure most people are familiar with it, but this is perhaps the most typical aggro deck you can expect. It has a lot of very aggressive units. A lot of them are fairly typical. It's got some very good direct nexus damage burn, and then it's got some champions that are really, really good for burn. You could argue that discard aggro is a little more traditional aggro because it's got a little more burn with Mystic Shots and Get Exciteds, but I would say Misfortune and Gangplank are more burn-based champions than, say, Draven. But either way, it's all the way like gas pedal to the floor, full-on aggro. All of these units are pretty low on curve, and the goal is just to run your opponent down really fast, kill them as quick as possible, get under a lot of decks that are going to be looking for the late mid-game-ish time frame for when they're going to win. We're looking to get under that and beat them to the punch. And this deck has been around basically since Bilgewater came out, and it has been one of the best aggro decks ever since. And it still is now. Someone asked in my last video, I think, in MetaCheck, what I thought the best aggro deck right now would be. This is it. Bilgewater Burn is very consistent. It has a lot of answers to a lot of different strategies, and it does present some very fast kills. Maybe not quite as fast as like a perfect discard aggro hand, but it's much more durable than a discard aggro perfect start. So while they might have a slightly faster clock, we have a slightly more reliable clock. So that's basically it. We're just looking to be the fastest deck in almost every single matchup we play, and we're just looking to do as many points of damage per turn as possible. So let's go over my current list. This begins with the champion package, which starts with 3 copies of Misfortune. This is same as always, really good card. Now the important thing to remember with Bilgewater Burn, because this is what many people will make as a mistake while playing this deck, is that we are not a Misfortune deck. Misfortune is not here because we're looking to level her up. We're basically never going to level up Misfortune. That would require, I think, it's turn 7, turn 9, something like that, to actually level her up, because we don't have any extra combat effects or anything like that. So that's extremely late game, and there's basically zero chance that a 3/3 lives that long for that. So be risky with Misfortune. You don't need her to live. If it forces extra damage through, throw her away to force extra damage through. It's really, she's there because she's very cost effective as a 3/3 for 3, and she provides guaranteed Nexus damage off of her trigger. That's the big reason she's here. The champion spell can be decent at times. I've had games that I've won just because of having Make It Rain. In fact, I think the last game I played, I won off of Make It Rain because they had some very powerful cards and they kept them alive through some effects, and I was able to use Make It Rain with a keg out to deal 2 to everything and just wipe their board and also deal a bunch of damage to their Nexus. So Make It Rain can be good. After the nerfs, it's not nearly as good for the deck because 3 mana is a lot for only 3 damage, and it's only 1 damage to the Nexus, essentially. But there are times where Make It Rain can be really effective, especially for leveling up our next champion, which is Gangplank. Make It Rain's another way we can deal damage on an opponent's turn to level up our Gangplank a little bit quicker, but we should not have any trouble leveling up Gangplank. This is, I wouldn't say it is a Gangplank deck, but this is definitely a deck where Gangplank shines. This is, in fact, one of the best Gangplank decks out there. If you're looking to actually play Gangplank level him up, and have him do crazy things. That happens a lot with this deck. We do so much damage so fast that leveling up Gangplank is very easy, and then his attack trigger does exactly what we want. Same like Misfortune, except his attack trigger is better than Misfortune's because it deals 1 damage to all enemies and the enemy nexus, whereas she only deals it to battling ones. So this will board wipe people, and that often can be game-winning, or essentially back-breaking for our opponents. So he is really strong in this deck. Not to mention, a 5-5 with Overwhelm for 5 is really good. A 6-6 with Overwhelm for 5 is really good. But the Powder Keg is insane for us as well. We have a lot of ways to use it. We can do things like Sleep with the Fishes or Noxian Fervor, sacking Powder Keg to deal even more damage to our opponent's Nexus without actually losing anything. Some of the best places you'll see Powder Keg is if you can play a leveled up Gangplank on a turn you're not attacking, for example, on the opponent's turn. You play him, get a Keg. You start the next turn, get another Keg, and then you swing. He's going to deal 3 damage to the opponent's Nexus and every unit they have, which board wipes a ton of decks, and also just kind of guarantees that his overwhelm damage will get through. And in top of all of this, his champion spell is pretty solid too, because it deals 1 to anything, so we can just fire it at the opponent's Nexus. We can also fire it at a unit, but depending on if we can kill the unit or not, it'll also do the same amount of damage to the Nexus, so that's really good. It's also really good for playing Gangplank and then parlaying to level up the Gangplank if you need to. So his champion spell is actually pretty decent. You won't use it a lot, but there's definitely going to you're going to use it at some point. It's going to happen, like guaranteed. You might never use a Make It Rain, but you will use a parlay for sure. Both are good, but again, and then the Powder Keg just synergizes with everything our deck does. Our deck has so many ways to deal damage to the opponent's Nexus directly through triggered effects or through spells, and this will boost the damage output of all of those, which also means you need to be careful with where you place your triggers. The first thing on the stack will trigger the Keg, so we'll get rid of the Keg and boost the damage. So make sure that the first thing that executes is always the one you want to have boosted. I didn't mention this in previous ones, and I'm not really sure why, but this is a very important concept and one I have to deal with constantly. We have a lot of stuff like Crackshot Corsair, Legion Saboteur, and then the Gangplank. Always make sure if you are going to an attack with Powder Kegs out, put Gangplank as your last attacker. This will make sure that his trigger is the one that boosts from the Keg, because that's almost always going to be the best option. The only time that might change is if you have a leveled up Misfortune, but again, that's almost never going to happen. I think I've played somewhere in the ballpark of 200 to 300 games of Bilgewater Burn over the past 3 seasons. I think I've leveled up Misfortune exactly once out of all of those games. Like, it's not going to happen, but if it does, you probably want her trigger to benefit from Powder Keg more than Gangplank's, because it's going to happen multiple times and all of them are going to get boosted by the Keg. But, normally speaking, always have Gangplank as your last attacker, because this trigger is always going to be the most powerful. So when you put one person on attack, their trigger goes onto the stack. Once you put the next unit with a trigger, that trigger goes on the stack. So you want to make sure that Gangplank is your last attacker, so that his trigger is put on the stack last, which means that it will happen first. That's a really important concept to get with Gangplank because of how Powder Kegs work with the deck. Now, he is the only way of getting Powder Kegs in the version I'm running, so you don't always have to deal with this a lot, but when you do have to deal with Powder Kegs, you're almost always going to have a Gangplank, and it is going to matter. So just make sure your attacks are set up correctly to benefit the most from your Gangplank and your Keg. Alright, now let's talk about the follower package and why this matters. First off, we have 3 copies of Crackshot Corsair. This is the one that I typically have to be the smartest about, because with 2 health, this lives a long time, and it's also not a particularly threatening body, so it's low on the priority for your opponent to kill, so I often will still have one of these kicking around once I have a Gangplank leveled up. So you want to make sure the Crackshot Corsair swings first, so that its trigger goes on the stack before the Gangplank. Otherwise, this is just a really great 1-drop for us. It's got 2 health instead of 1, so it survives a lot of things, and it guarantees a lot of damage, because all we have to do is attack. The thing that attacks doesn't need to live. They can even gain up life afterwards or whatever, but it doesn't matter. We'll still get that 1 damage to the Nexus, which helps us to level up our Gangplank. It's incredibly powerful, and it can be good with a lot of things, even if Crackshot Corsair is not attacking. Not to mention, this has slowly become one of our best turn 1s, because Saboteur and Precious Pet each have their own issues. Jagged Butcher can be chump blocked a lot. Crackshot Corsair is guaranteed damage on turn 1 in basically any matchup. I'm trying to think what someone could have that would actually kill a Crackshot Corsair on turn 1, and I don't think there's really anything. The worst that could happen is like they guile your Corsair so it can't attack. And that's such a rare circumstance that this is almost always going to be your best play. They could trade with Crackshot Corsair, but again, because of that trigger, you're going to get 1 damage every turn it happens, which isn't necessarily the same with Saboteur. But we'll talk about that more in a minute, because next we have 3 copies of Jagged Butcher. This is just a really great value card. Don't feel like you have to play it with Plunder. Sometimes you get to play it with a Plunder, but a lot of times you won't even be able to play it with Plunder, because it would be better to just play it as a 2/2 and swing and get that extra damage than having a 3/3. Sometimes 3/3 is going to matter and you're going to want the 3/3, but usually speaking, this is just a very good cost-effective unit. It's like Cythria, a 1-mana 2/2 is really strong, even without any keywords or anything like that. So do not be afraid to play this on turn 1 and swing with it. It's always better to have something on turn 1 than to have nothing. Next up, we have 3 copies of Legion Saboteur. This is the other thing with the trigger. The difference between this and Crackshot Corsair is that there are a number of ways to stop this turn 1 from dealing Nexus damage, and that's Go Hard or Thermogenic Beam. Both are very, or there's a couple others too, like Blade's Edge, but those 2 are very common. You see that a lot in their respective decks, so that's a real thing to be concerned about or worried about. So it's generally going to be more of a guarantee with Crackshot Corsair. That said, this is our highest damage output turn 1. If you don't think your opponent's going to have any action on turn 1, this is going to be great. Or if you expect your opponent to play like a Teemo turn 1, a Zoe turn 1, or even a Fleet Feather Tracker, then Saboteur is really good, because if they block, they lose their unit, and those units are high value. So if your opponent loses those units, that's so good for you. You are definitely willing to trade a Saboteur for that, and you'll still get damage to the Nexus from the trigger. But if you expect nothing to happen turn 1, like they're going to have no play, this is your best drop without a doubt, because that's 3 damage on turn 1. And some of our fastest kills revolve around Saboteurs that our opponent can't deal with early. That said, if you expect them to have some sort of unit that's going to be something you're not as thrilled to trade with, good examples of this would be like Omen Hawk. Omen Hawk's pretty bad for a Saboteur or a Butcher start, but Precious Pet, which we have 3 copies of that, is going to be a lot better against that start. So this is where your Precious Pet's going to be your best turn 1 play, because thanks to Fearsome, a lot of decks are going to have trouble blocking it early or blocking it at all. Precious Pet, for example, to give a matchup where Precious Pet's actually insane and it's one of your best cards, Precious Pet is always such a problem for Starspring decks. They have so many units that have 2 power or less that Precious Pet can get so much damage done even in the late game against those decks. So that's where it's going to really shine, is matchups like that where you're expecting them to have difficulties blocking Fearsome, or at least difficulties early blocking Fearsome, but you do kind of expect them to have some way to block like a Saboteur or Jagged Butcher to prevent you from dealing damage on turn 1. Again, the big throw out here is like Bilgewater Spring or the or Omen Hawk decks. So those are the ones where you're going to definitely want to put priority on Precious Pet. Next up, we have 3 copies of Imperial Demolitionist. This is just direct Nexus burn. That's the whole reason it's here. We have a number of units that we can hit it with now. There's been times where it's worse in the deck than others, but since we have Crackshot Corsair and Jagged Butcher, there's a lot of things we can hit with this that we can even play this on curve and still have it be good, like Crackshot Corsair into this with Crackshot Corsair Living, or Jagged Butcher into this. Really strong plays. That said, your best turn 2, other than playing 2 1-drops, is probably Legion Grenadier, which we have 3 copies of that. This is just a great unit. It's 3 power for 2 mana, so that's really good. And then if they chump block it or they kill it, we're still going to deal damage to their Nexus, so that's really great. This also sets up a lot of good situations where if you're trying to level up a Gangplank before you play him, you can always Noxian Fervor or Sleep with the Fishes your Legion Grenadier, because then one of 2 things is going to happen. Either the spell's going to resolve, and your Grenadier is going to die, and you're going to deal a ton of damage to your opponent's Nexus, or they're going to kill Grenadier to make the Noxian Fervor or the Sleep with the Fishes do nothing, which is still going to deal damage to their Nexus, which is still going to trigger Gangplank to level them up. Grenadier just kind of makes sure that if what you're caring about is a damage trigger, you're going to get it no matter what happens. Next up, we have probably my most unique pick for the deck that you won't see a lot of people running it, but I do truly believe it's better than the alternatives, and that's 2 copies of Lounging Lizard. You'll see, and I'll talk about this more in the flex spots section, you'll see a lot of people running Iron Ballista. I prefer Lounging Lizard because you usually get 2 attacks off with him, which is a nice 6 points of damage because many decks won't be able to block him, and a lot of decks that can block him aren't going to be willing to block him. We're talking about like Zoe, decks like that where it's a high value elusive unit they don't want to use. Zoe, Teemo, those are the big offenders of that. So he's going to force damage through a lot because of elusive, and I find that he's usually contributed more damage than Iron Ballista ever was able to do for me. So that's why I prefer Lounging Lizard in this spot. It's only a 2 of. It's not really important. We'll talk about the other options when I get to the flex spot section. Then we have 3 copies of Zap Sprayfin. This is really great. Same thing, elusive. So it's a 2/2 for 4, which is not great, but it's elusive. It gives us a free spell mana, which can be relevant. And most importantly, it gets us Noxian Fervor. That's the only spell it can hit. So it gets us Noxian Fervor. Noxian Fervor is really great for a number of key matchups, let alone the fact it's just Direct Nexus Burn. So, like, using it in response to things is always going to be good. If you're going to lose a unit anyways, blast the opponent's Nexus. If they have a lifelinker, you can block the lifelinker, kill your unit with Noxian Fervor. But we'll talk about that more when we get to Noxian Fervor. It's just important to mention it here because that's what this card is here to do. It literally just gets you that 1 card, and that's why we're running it, because that's good enough for this card to be a 3 of in our deck. Then we have perhaps one of the best units in the deck, which is 3 copies of Jack the Winner. This generates so much burn, and we do have a number of things that can survive Sleep with Fishes, and we have a number of things that late game aren't going to be as good. Like a Precious Pet on turn 6 isn't going to be that valuable, so we can always trade it in with Sleep with the Fishes. Or say if we have like Lounging Lizard and it's down to like a 3/1, we swing with it, deal 3 damage with it, and then Sleep with the Fishes, get even more value out of it. The important part is in mid-range and control matchups, this is going to generate a ton of damage into the late game. So if we're expecting to get a ton of damage in early, and then they're going to wrestle the board from us, and we're not going to be able to force damage through anymore, this is a great card for being like, well, we'll still be able to force damage through and close out those last few points. So he's incredibly powerful, and it's really good for leveling up Gangplank, because sometimes you'll reach that 4-5 point with Gangplank, and it'll be hard to really level him up. You can use Sleep with the Fishes, get that 5th turn hit, play Gangplank, get his keg, swing, get all that beautiful, beautiful stuff, and you'll do it all for 0 mana, which is great. Then we have 2 copies of Captain Farron. Same concept here. This is just for winning the late game, and I've played with a number of Captain Farron a lot of times. I think 2 is actually probably where we want to be right now, although there isn't a ton of control decks, and that's where Captain Farron's usually the best. But an 8/8 with Overwhelm for 8 mana is insanely powerful. That's really, really good. But the important part here is that it comes with 3 copies of Decimate, and that can just guarantee the win against so many different decks. If they're gumming up the board, it's like, alright, well, I have 3 Decimates in hand. That's 12 points of damage in 15 mana. That's sometimes hard to get to, but oftentimes when we play Captain Farron, we're likely able to cast 2 Decimates the following turn. So if our opponent can't kill us right then and there, they're probably going to die the next turn. And that's what Farron's there for, is just guaranteeing the win against certain decks that are going to slow us down. Now let's look at the spell package. Pretty quick, pretty simple. 3 copies of Noxian Fervor right off the bat. I mentioned a couple of the things that make this so good, but this is an insanely powerful burn spell. You wouldn't expect it because it's going to kill any unit aside from Gangplank or Jack or Farron, our top end, but any other unit we have is going to die to Noxian Fervor, almost guaranteed. But it deals 3 to anything, so if we have to kill something, this is our only form of real removal, aside from, say, a Gangplank leveled up trigger, which is so late game that's if we have to kill something early, that's not going to happen. But this is our dominant form of removal, our only way to really do it, and it can also be point of Nexus, and there's a number of great tricks you can do. As I mentioned, if they have a big life linker, something like Solari Sunforger from our last week's episode, if they swing with it, you can block, and then Noxian Fervor to kill your unit that's blocking. Now, they won't deal any combat damage, and so they won't gain any life, and you can still fling that damage at their Nexus, so you're still dealing damage to their Nexus while preventing them from gaining life. It's also great against Fiora, because if they're looking like they're going to win with Fiora, or if it's just in general Fiora's going to kill something, sacrifice it to Noxian Fervor to prevent her from getting that level up condition. So that can be really great for slowing that down as well. There's a lot of great points like that, and then just generally speaking, we can swing with a bunch of things, and if something's going to die, yeah, well, Noxian Fervor it for even more damage. It's just A lot of great value. Or like the Lounging Lizard, as I said, you can always swing with it, deal damage, and then Noxian Fervor it because you're going to lose it anyways. So, really great burn spell. Really cost effective. It's kind of hard for us to bank mana with this deck because we're playing so many things every turn, but a 3 mana spell is definitely doable. Then we have 3 copies of Decimate. This is our big finisher. Deal 4 to the enemy Nexus. You almost never want to keep this in your opening hand, but it's almost always going to be a great top deck because this is a ton of damage. It's a bit expensive, but again, for what it does, it's really good, especially against decks that don't have access to life gain. This is going to be a very reliable way to win the game against those decks. It's just more Nexus burn that blockers can't save them from. So let's talk a bit about the flex spots real quick. So I mentioned a couple of things. We'll talk about Crusty Codger first. I've seen a number of people play anywhere from like 1 to 3 copies of this. Most people who play Crusty Codger will drop something else to get a fifth 1-drop, but they'll usually only run 1 copy of it. So they'll have the 3 Saboteurs, 3 Precious Pets, 3 Jagged Butchers, 3 Crackshot Corsairs, and then like a 1 of Crusty Codger. I've seen that a lot. It's a pretty strong 1-drop because it's essentially Jagged Butcher just without any potential for the Plunder trigger. But as I said, that's totally fine. You're fine with a 1-mana 2/2. So that's what it'll be every time. We have no way to heal it or anything like that. It's just making sure that you always have that turn 1-1-drop. You're pretty much guaranteed it with 4 1-drops, but if you are having issues with that or you really just want all these low curve things, you can always throw a Crusty Codger in there. If you're going to do that, I would probably trim a Captain Farron for it, or just cut the Lounging Lizard package out entirely and go up 2 Crusty Codgers, something like that, or maybe like 1 Codger, 1 Farron, depending on what you're seeing in the meta. Now, the more common thing you'll see, most people are running Iron Ballista over Lounging Lizard, so that's 2 copies of that. It's a strong overwhelm threat for 3 mana. I mean, 4 damage, 3 mana. If they don't have anything that can trade with it, you could get damage in multiple turns. That is pretty strong, but like I said, in my personal experience, I found Lounging Lizards to put out more damage than Iron Ballista. But this is a very, if you want to go more standard, this is the pick to take, is replace Lounging Lizard with these Iron Ballistas. And if we do see more Zoe decks in the future, it's possible that Iron Ballista will start to outvalue that, but in my experience, I've personally preferred Lounging Lizard more. Now, another option, same spot, you can put 2 Monkey Idols instead. I used to use Monkey Idol a lot. I loved this card. It was really, really good. And then I actually was using this instead of Iron Ballista way back when. And then they released Lounging Lizard, and that took the spot over for me, personally. Monkey Idol is really good. It will make leveling up your Gangplank a lot easier. It will make your aggro matchups better, because you can get a Powder Monkey to swing with, you can get a Powder Monkey to block with, that you're not going to lose anything out of blocking with the Powder Monkey. So that's the big advantage, is that most aggro decks, they're not going to want to block, because once you block, you're losing damage output. With this, you don't lose any damage output for blocking, so you can be a little more defensive against other aggro decks, and that can really help you to break the symmetry or outrace them. So Monkey Idol is definitely a good potential pickup, but it's kind of fallen out of favor with me a little bit myself. But it's definitely something to consider if that looks better to you, or you really want to make sure your Gangplank's leveling up on time. After that, we got a couple of other weird changes. I've seen people run Monkey Business. I'm not particularly thrilled with it. We have a lot of ways to deal damage, but the problem is most of our ways to deal damage are by attacking. So that can be great for the Plunder Summon Another at the next round start if you're trying to fast level a Gangplank, but that usually means that summoning a Powder Monkey is just going to deal 1 damage for 2 mana, which isn't particularly great, and then it gives you a blocker. There's some times where you could block with like a Grenadier, deal damage to the Nexus, play this, and then you get 1 damage this turn, and then an attacker the next turn, but it's not going to be really great. So I tend to avoid this. If you want to go that route, you can play with the numbers, maybe go down the Lounging Lizard, something like that. Another big problem with Monkey Business, obviously, is that now this is another hit off Zap's Sprayfin, and being able to guarantee those Noxian Fervors to me is worth far more than this card could ever give out. But I have seen people run this, so that's an option. I probably wouldn't run it, but you could. Another great option is you can always replace Captain Farron with Riptide Rex. Both do very different things, but both are very valuable things. Riptide Rex is one of the oldest Bilgewater finishers that a lot of decks were running, like when Bilgewater Tempo with Ezreal was a thing. Riptide Rex was a key component of that strategy. Now, he has been nerfed. There's one less cannon barrage, and he's a 6-4 instead of an 8-4, and that definitely does hurt. But he can be really great, especially against other mid-range decks, because he comes with the potential to board wipe. He's also great with kegs. So if you're going to add anything that adds kegs to the deck, you can always throw this in. The big problem is our deck isn't particularly set up to trigger Plunder all that easily. Now, Riptide Rex is definitely a unit you're okay attacking first and then slamming the Riptide Rex, but obviously the perfect world, you'd want to deal damage before you play the Riptide Rex so that it can attack as well as potentially wipe your opponent's board, because that's one of the places he's going to be best, is against mid-range decks that are going to gum up the board. If you can trigger him and then play him all before attacking, he can clear the board so that all of your attackers can get their damage through. So he's a really strong card for that matter, and the Cannon Barrages can deal a ton of Nexus damage too, all for free essentially. He does all of his value up front for the 8 mana, whereas Captain Farron, you're still hoping you can cast those spells in time next turn, which they're slow, so that's not a guarantee, but you're hoping you can cast them before you die. So Riptide Rex avoids that whole thing by just dealing all of its effect right up front. Another thing you could do is you could drop a Captain Farron or something like that for a 1 of the Dreadway. You really don't want to go more than 1 with this card. It's very strong. It's great because it draws you a Gangplank, but then it also doubles all the damage dealt by your skill spells and allies, which obviously is really, really strong, but tapping out 9 mana for 1 card is not something this deck is really looking to do. But if you're having a problem where people keep stalling you to the late game, and then you have trouble closing out, this is a great card for fixing that problem. So Dreadway is definitely something you can include. So let's talk about mulligans real quick. Mulligans for this deck are pretty simple. You always want to have a 1-drop. In fact, you want anywhere between 1 to 3 1-drops. If I have 4 1-drops, I'll mulligan 1. Sometimes. But even then, I'll think about it. Basically, I'll almost never mulligan anything less than 3 1-drops. It's so good to go like 1-drop, 1-drop, 1-drop with this deck. It's very hard for a lot of decks to deal with that unless you're expecting like a Withering Wail and all your 1-drops are 1 health. Then you start thinking about it. But generally speaking, that's such a powerful start for our deck that we'll take any number of 1-drops we can find. You basically only ever want to keep 1 3+ cost card. Like, you don't really want to keep, like, a Misfortune and a Gangplank, for example. You don't want to keep, like, a Zap Sprayfin and a Lounging Lizard. There's some places where you might want that, but generally speaking, you want to keep 3 2-cost or less cards in your hand, and then 1 late-game card. Something like Jack, something like Zap, something like Gangplank, Misfortune, whatever it is. And there's going to be matchups where each one is better than the others, but that's pretty much how you're going to want it to be. You're almost never going to keep a spell in your opening hand. Like, actually, you're almost never going to keep a spell in your opening hand. You'd rather keep a Zap Sprayfin than an Noxian Fervor, for example, because you get 2 things for the cost of 1 rather than 1. But Noxian Fervor is something you'll keep sometimes. So, against other aggro decks, just try to be faster than them. It's as simple as that. Just try to be faster or more reliable at putting damage out than them. If you don't expect elusives, play your elusives, or have your elusives, so you can force damage through. If you're expecting them to gum up the board, have Direct Nexus ready. If you're expecting them to have a bunch of low units, like 1-drop or 1-power units, play stuff with 2 health so that you're not making the trade. That they have to make the trade, but that you don't have to lose your unit. Just try to keep ahead of them in board while just running them down. The goal here is just to be the fastest. The only exception to that is if you think you can level up a Gangplank very quickly and you have one, Gangplank will win aggro matchups. Just almost always guaranteed because of how his trigger works. And the fact that he's an overwhelmer, so he'll usually clear whatever unit they have and then get the full overwhelm damage through. So Gangplank is where you can be a little more controlling, but just look to run them down, and hopefully you level up Gangplank in the process of that, slap them and run down. You don't want a Captain Farron. You probably don't want a Jack. Other than that, pretty much anything else is going to be good. Just look for the fastest hand you can find. Against mid-range, you're going to want something fast. Their early game's kind of weak, and that's where you can get a lot of damage through, because a lot of them, if you're playing against Demacia, they're not going to want to lose that Fleet Feather tracker. Like, if they're Fleet Feather plus Misfortune, Fleet Feather's so powerful for them with Misfortune, they're not going to want to take the trade, which means you can get a lot of damage through early. So just look to run them down early, but keep some answer for the late game. Jack the Winner is probably your best card in this matchup, but a Captain Farron can be really good too. Gangplank can also be good. Zap Sprayfin, funny enough, pretty good too, because they'll usually have a hard time dealing with him because of the fact that he's elusive. So that's also fairly good, but just look for really early aggression paired with one of these great late game force the extra damage through cards. Against control, very similar. Go fast, and then keep something big. Like, this is where Zap Sprayfin, not as good against control. You really want Jack the Winner. You really want Captain Farron. Captain Farron's, in fact, your best card for control, because you're going to probably get to 8 mana, and then they're probably not going to be able to kill you shortly after, and they probably aren't going to gain 12 points of health. So the Decimate should help finish the game off against them. So Captain Farron's really good into that specific matchup. Definitely worth considering, or keeping one of that, and then something very aggressive. You may notice, key trend here, you usually want to keep 3 aggressive cards, then 1 card that's dependent on the matchup. That's some sort of way of dealing with a matchup. If you're playing into Fiora, keeping a Noxian Fervor in your opening hand is actually really, really good. You won't really want to do it against Lee Sin combo, or some other deck like Targon Plaza where you're expecting them to eventually have life gain. It can be good in that matchup, but it can also be bad in that matchup if they don't hit the right life gain stuff. Then it's kind of a dead card that can just get countered. So you don't really want Fervor in that matchup, but against Fiora, you absolutely want Fervor. Fervor can kill Fiora if they give you a window in which you can actually kill her without them saving her. But it can also kill whatever unit she's going to kill, preventing her from getting that kill trigger for her leveling up condition. So I'll actually keep a Noxian Fervor in a matchup that includes Fiora. But pretty much anywhere else, I'm not going to keep a spell in my opener. Never keep Decimate. It's always a better top deck than it is a card in your opening hand. Just never keep it. Always pitch Decimate. If you see it, get rid of it. If you get stuck with it in your hand, it's whatever, but it's always going to be a better top deck than to have something like Decimate sitting in your hand. You'll keep like a Jack the Winner, you'll keep like a Gangplank, something that's going to do a lot of value for what it is. Decimate's a pretty narrow category of what it'll do, and you'd always rather just have it as something you might randomly draw into than something you're planning around and holding the whole game. So that's your basic mulligans for the deck. You just want to be as aggressive as possible, but have one thing dedicated to the matchup that's going to get you through to the end, hopefully. And that's the deck for this episode. You can find the deck code as well as a deck link in the description below if you want to try it out yourself. Now let's jump into the matches.
Alright, game 1. And it's going to be against Dragons. Well, this is a decent matchup if we can get off to the races quick. Zap Sprayfin's kind of good here. I might actually keep it because of the elusive. This is a pretty lackluster start, but at least it's something. Yeah, alright, we'll try for this. I mean, Zap Sprayfin's probably going to die to... Ooh, that's not what we wanted. Zap Sprayfin's probably going to die to a combat spell, but... oh well. Now, hopefully they're on the slowish hand. Well, kind of looks like it. But this is definitely not great. This is terrible, actually, to have 3 high-cost cards here. I mean, at least with the turn 2 Demolitionist, we're going to be in good shape to level this Gangplank up. But we definitely could hope for better here. I think we are definitely going to play this Lounging Lizards next turn, because it should be able to get damage through this turn. The only downside is we won't be able to do damage on turn 4, but we should be able to get 3, ooh. Alright, well that will be scary eventually. Yeah, that's a little unfortunate, but we force a lot of damage through here. And we can just start decimating soon. They are a Targon deck, though, which that's the big downside. Oh, that is... that's brutal, is what that is. That is brutal. That could not have been worse for us. That is literally the worst card our opponent could have had for us at that moment in time. They just gained back all of that damage we did. That's, yeah, that's horrible. Alright, well, we'll play Misfortune, get the extra damage through. And we can bank the mana for Noxian Fervor, in case he finds another Sun Forger. Is he really thinking about, like, single combating the Lounging Lizard? Yeah, that would be weird. Yeah, we're fine just passing. Well, Gangplank is almost leveled up. In fact, we could probably level Gangplank up this turn. Oh, that's kind of rough, too. I don't think I could take a hit that big, so we'll block here, and then we will try to fling her here. He probably has a combat spell. And then this will be wasted. I mean, if he has a combat spell, he should use it. Plain and simple. Yeah. Okay, he has it. So we're just going to Decimate then and play a Crackshot Corsair. We are in terrible shape right now, though. That cannot be stated enough. My opponent, incredibly lucky, had the perfect card, so that's unfortunate, but we can't really do anything about it. Bright side is we can always play this Crackshot Corsair to try and get him to play something else, so that our Gangplank is a little more unexpected. Man, if he has Judgment, that would be pretty brutal. Okay, Shyvana's not that bad. Well, he needs like double single combat to kill Gangplank now. He can destroy the keg though. Okay, so if I do this, it deals 2 to everything. Perfect. That's what we want. Put the Gangplank trigger on the stack first. Well, executing first. Does the most amount of damage. I mean, he's not going to take that much damage. Almost certainly. Wait, deal with the keg? Okay. Okay. Block Gangplank.
Face me.
Go down to 8.
Not the egg.
I mean, we get close there. And that wipes his board at least. Well, not wipes the board. He still has Shyvana, I suppose. The question is, does he have stuff like Star Shaping? Because that's the stuff that'll really mess us up. I can even live through an Eclipse Dragon. That's not a problem. That is one of the more unfortunate things he could have.
Should know to stay out of the way.
And we want this Jack to live. Ooh, okay. Well, Gangplank does change the dynamic somewhat. Well, like I said, Eclipse Dragon's not a problem. Well, we'll pass.
Prepare for battle.
Suffer my fury.
That is a lot of damage, but that doesn't kill us. It does have us almost dead, though. Okay.
Witness my true power.
So what can we do here? What's our best play? That's the real question. So if I play Jack, I guess that's our highest damage output? Yeah, that should be our highest damage. We got Sleep with the Fishes. Oh, Gangplank. A second Gangplank's actually surprisingly good. Let's see what he has. I mean, Trigger will do 2. Okay. Aurelian Soul. Now, what's our best play? So Trigger does 2, down to 7. This does another 2. Probably our best bet is deal damage here, down to 2. Trigger down to 6. This down to 4, and he's dead. Unless he has single combat. Or Guiding Touch. Okay, well there's our trigger. Drops him to 6. Okay, interesting way of doing that. Yeah, that makes more sense. Well, I'm trying to think. So he could still have single combat, and single combat are Jack. If this resolves, we should... Okay. Does he have Guiding Touch? It's kind of a weird card for him to have in that deck. No Guiding Touch, then we win. Wow! I feel like we stole that game. That was such a terrible hand, but ended up working. Gangplank Tron sometimes works. Yeah, they had the Sunforger, but they didn't have Star Shaping or other life gain like that. So we got a little bit lucky there, but we will take it. On to the next.
Alright, game number 2, in a very, very similar concept. Zoe Plaza. This is probably worse than the last deck for us, but hard to say. Zap Sprayfin's going to be a lot better here for dealing with Zoe. We don't want late game threats, and Noxian Fervor is something Zap will get us. We don't need another one in hand. It's actually pretty bad for us to have that. I think Saboteur is probably the best play here. There's an argument for going Precious Pet. That would be better against a Spacey Sketcher, but this is going to be the best against a Zoe, or a Nothing. Also great against no play. Alright. Nothing, really. That's surprising.
Ask me about dragons. They have an
Egghead
answer.
Worship, or Researcher. Play Crack Shot Corsair. So we can block this if he swings. The extra damage is actually worth going for since we have this Misfortune. Also should be kind of hard for them to deal with Misfortune depending on what their hand is, so
Follow the tracks.
we're definitely in good shape for putting a Misfortune on the board. We're not going to swing with Misfortune, I don't think, though. That's a bit of a risk. That's probably more of a risk than we need to take, but hard to say. We'll see what our opponent does. I mean, if they don't play anything, then we're kind of fine throwing Misfortune away just to trade with a no Nightfall Pale Cascade Researcher. Man, how worried are we about Pale Cascade? And how much do we care? So we swing like this, like this, like that. He can trade with this and block that. So then he would take 2, 3, 4, down to 13. Nah, we can. We're not gonna level this Misfortune up. Not before it's too late. Yep, there's the Pale Cascade. Knew that was coming. That's fine though. This doing that block. Okay, all right. I was gonna say that would be extraordinarily greedy if that's all he blocked. But we made him waste a Pale Cascade. We wiped his board. We lost our Misfortune, but we kept everything else alive. So we're in decent shape here. We can play Zap Sprayfin next turn, so that's pretty good. What did he get? So he didn't get a Serpent. What could he have grabbed then? Okay, no Sunforger. That's also great. Yeah, so we'll play this.
Keep up, keep up.
Although he could play like Charger or Serpent now or Scamps. He could go Scamps. Scamps would be pretty bad, especially since we're holding Fervortron. Okay, so he doesn't have that. So this is a ton of damage, and we probably have him pretty close to dead here. Oh yeah.
Got us covered.
Oh, we're in great shape. Let's see what our opponent plays. We should have him several times over dead. We can cast 2 Fervors this turn. So it depends. If he casts Starry Shaping, that changes things a bit.
Her light is our sword.
Okay, so I think we can just fire this off. I don't think there's much he can do here, because the only thing he could have is a single combat, and we can fire in response. Yeah. Alright. Well, I think we have it. Yep, not bad. Quick one, which is good. Definitely got lucky that one. I said we probably got fairly lucky in that last game. We definitely got lucky in this one. That was pretty good. I don't know what he grabbed off Spacey Sketcher, but it couldn't have been good, so I'm going to assume he had some pretty bad options. Maybe like Messenger, Equinox, Moonfall. That would have been pretty bad, although even Equinox is usable in that situation. No Scamps, presumably. He wouldn't have been much better off with Zoe. So yeah, we definitely got a bit lucky there. He had a pretty slow hand from the looks of it, and not a ton of life gain, or he simply played it wrong. Playing Sunforger with the single combat up is extremely risky when you're only at 2 health and you know that your opponent has at least 1 Noxian Fervor. Just counting on the 1 single combat to get you through is definitely worse than just holding up like a Star Shaping. Star Shaping would have been better. He would have lived through that turn, then Sunforger the next turn, which we still could have killed in response to, but gives him a lot more options. Maybe he didn't have Star Shaping, though. Maybe that's where we got a little bit lucky. So, yeah, definitely lucky one, but we'll take it on to the next. Oh, wow. I was really on the money with my meta check, wasn't I? I mean, I guess the first deck didn't have Zoe in it, but this is so much Zoe. And I don't think any of these are particularly great for this deck. Lounging Lizard could be keepable, but I think we just need something faster and hope they're on a slow hand themselves. Yeah, that'll work. What's our best bet here? We'll go with Saboteur. Saboteur is usually pretty good here. Trying to think. So he might have Spacey Sketcher in his deck. Okay, it is Zoe. We are definitely fine taking a trade with Zoe. Okay, yeah, I didn't think our opponent was going to give us that. Double Crackshot Corsair probably, and Swing. Ooh, that changes the dynamic somewhat. Yeah, we'll go Corsair. If he has Eye of the... that's so unfortunate. I was gonna say, if he has Eye of the Dragon, then we're punished. Like, this would have been a better play into Eye of the Dragon. But our opponent was smart and didn't show us that until the last moment. Yeah, we're gonna play Misfortune. Just full swing. It should be, well, I suppose, yeah, he could super cool Star Chart plus Pale Cascade. He's probably right just to cast this right off the bat and see what he can find for a Celestial, see if he can find a blocker that's good. Like, Messenger's not awful here. Okay. Sunblessed Vigor. Okay, well that is substantially worse than a... that's substantially worse than Pale Cascade. Pale Cascade would have been much more problematic for us. I mean, he still can block and kill that, but we put him down to 2. We drop him to a low health point. We keep our Misfortune, and Misfortune hits because he's greedy and trying to save this Zoe. That might work fine for him. Chances are, though, he needs to take a few more risks. I mean, he's gonna get this Dragon Link, but that's still not a ton of life gain. He kind of needs more than that. We'll see what he plays. If he goes straight to combat, we're gonna play Zap. If he doesn't, okay, we'll take the 2. Our life total is not in a huge threat right now.
Gotta go with the flow.
Okay, so we're gonna have 6 mana to spend next turn, potentially. Let's see if he plays some units. Because if he does not, we're in decent shape. I think he's going to block with this Zoe because he's reaching the point now that he has to. Let's see what he can find. What are we most worried about here? Crescent Strike won't do much because we're probably open attacking. Charger dies to the Misfortune trigger, but it does let him chump. Messenger's probably one of the scarier things here. Serpent's not really that great. I suppose, was that Moonfall, the cost reducer? That could be kind of bad for us, depending on what he's holding. Does he have another Eye of the Dragon? That's another question. If he has 2, then it's a problem. Okay. Okay. Moonglow's not that big of a problem. And how worried are we about him playing things this turn? Because we could go for this whole Legion's Grenadier. Nah, I think we're better off with this. Make it as hard on him as possible to buff Dragonling and draw cards off of it. Okay. Drawing some spells. Okay. now we have a choice. So, we can fling Misfortune at him. Or we can fling a Crackshot Corsair at Eye of the Dragon. And keep our Misfortune alive. Now the downside here is that... Ooh, well, we could fling Misfortune at Eye of the Dragon and kill Eye of the Dragon. That would be decent, because he's going to get more Dragonlings next turn. So this drops him to 5. Okay, we'll do that. That's a pretty low health point there. Then we can play Legion Grenadier plus Jagged Butcher. It's going to be hard for him to recover from that. Not impossible, but it is going to be hard, and this Jack the Winner could just steal the game for us. And we have a blocker for Zoe right now. He has to rebuild his engine again, so that's the big thing going for us right now. Decimate can steal a win here if he's not careful. We're looking to play Jack this turn. That's the big thing we're looking to do. Getting Jack down would be phenomenal. But it depends on what he has. Okay, so he's going to get an Noxian Fervor. Because it's one of 3 spells, correct? Okay. We can still kill that. Sparklefly. We can kill that as well. 1 mana. Alright, we'll play Jack.
Aren't any gods here? Just me.
If he swings, we'll trade with Sparklefly. I think Sparklefly is better than Zoe, right? Yeah. Yeah. Let's get rid of that as soon as possible. The less life gain he has, the better. Yep. I don't think there's anything he could have really done there. We were in really good shape. Well, this deck is doing what I was hoping it would do, and that is beat Zoe, and beat Zoe a lot. That's really the big reason I've picked up this deck again. Someone asked about what I thought the best aggro deck was in the format right now, and I said that it was probably this. And I don't like what Zoe could mean for this format, and I think aggro is one of the better ways to run her down, so that has worked exceptionally well. Targon Plaza is a little bit sketchier, but you saw that match and how that went, so maybe not. Either way, we will take that. On to the next. Okay, interesting. DN Riven Quinn. So this should definitely be a Plaza deck. All about leveling up Riven fast. We don't want the Decimate, but I will keep this kind of hand almost every time. House Spider's a big risk here for the turn 2, so it's possible we open attack on turn 2. Although, who knows? They're almost certainly going to be playing Plaza, though. Plaza House Spider, that's how I would do this shell. Interesting run Quinn instead of Lucian. That's pretty neat.
I have my orders.
The fact that he played Fleet Feather means that I'm probably going to attack anyways this next turn.
I'll shoot the wings off a Bilgewasp.
Yeah. That's highly unfortunate. Okay, well, I think we're going to just full swing and offer him the trades. Although, wait, so if we full swing, he can trade here, here, and then eat this? Yeah, okay, this is better. This is better. Even though it offers him the better trades. We still get 3 damage through. We kill these 2 things. He's definitely in good shape right now, but we can bank a Noxian Fervor this turn, potentially, and then the double jacks could get us somewhere. He has challengers already, though, and Quinn in deck, so it's not extremely likely to work, to be honest, but let's see what he does. If he plays Plaza, I'll play this Jagged Butcher. I probably should play the Butcher regardless, to be honest, but well, yeah, we'll play him. I don't think it's necessarily wise to wait to see if we can, well, we'll just Decimate, I guess. Not going to swing. This is defensive now. This Jagged Butcher is not going to win us the game, in all probability. Okay, well now we have to wait for our opponent to attack before he can play Jack this turn. Yeah, Precious Pet would have been a
Nothing
bit
gets
better
between me and
last
my
turn.
mark.
Ooh, that's unfortunate. Yeah, that is suboptimal. I don't think we can Fervor, right? We need to get this Jack down. Oh. Wild. Okay, so we take 3, and then we're going to take... what? 4 plus 3, 7, 10, down to 5? That's sketchy. Yeah, I mean, we'll let him attack. So, I could play Jack here and eat the Quinn. But, if he has single combat... well, I wouldn't be able to eat the Quinn. I'd eat Valor, probably. But if he has single combat, he'd then be able to use, like, House Spider to kill the Jack. And yes, he'd lose 2 things for the cost of 1, but I still think that could be pretty bad for us. Now we're playing units. And as many as we can. Is it worth doing this, maybe? To kill Quinn? Probably. And then we'll play Demolitionist. Ooh, I think we just lose now, right?
If they don't break, they'll burn. For the glory of Noxus.
Let's see what he goes for. Smart choice is swing with Valor, then swing with Quinn. Okay, so Valor is gonna pull this combat. The question is, what else does he have? I mean, he goes to combat next turn too, so we're probably dead. Oh yeah, that's game. Okay, well, can't win them all. No 5-0 this week, but yeah, our opponent was extraordinarily lucky. Nothing more than that. The double House Spiders, plus the Quinn on turn 5, and the Grand Plaza. He just had the perfect hand. We can't beat that, but not much to worry about there. I still don't think that deck is very good. There's a reason I gave it up very early on. Not bad for this matchup specifically. They line up pretty well because of the House Spiders and the Fleet Feather, so things can work very well for them, and they had Quinn with Plaza. Everything worked perfect for him there, and that is how you're going to look to beat like another aggro deck, but the deck's still not great, but got us there, so on to the next. Okay. Well, not a Zoe deck, so that's nice. Ezreal Draven. Okay. Well, I mean, Captain Farron's not terrible, I suppose. But it's also very much not great. So like 1, 3, 5, 7. So we don't get to attack on the Captain Farron turn. I think I'll still keep it, but we'll pitch these two, and we'll definitely keep Saboteur. He could have an answer to this turn 1, but it's still worth it. Gangplank's bad. Did not want that, but yeah, we'll go Saboteur turn 1. It's most likely to be our best play. Okay, and he doesn't have the Thermogenic? Interesting. Well, that's good to know, although that means he is much more likely to draw it for Captain Farron. But that is the thing we are most scared of. Well, that's super unfortunate. That could not be worse for us. House Spider is the bane of this deck's existence, and our opponents are lucky enough to keep drawing them. Oh, why did I pass? Oh, that was not intentional. Oh, man. That was bad. Well, if we miss by 1 point, we know why. I didn't play one there because I was a little bit worried about a Static Shock.
The world's a big place.
That's not good either. We'll bank the mana. We'll probably play Saboteur after he's gotten Mystic Shot, maybe? Although... Okay, so how close are we? That's not bad. That's not bad at all. Jack, we're okay with, although it is pretty bad into this kind of matchup. Alright, so Precious Pet isn't going to do much anymore. So we will throw it away, because this can block, that'll kill it with the Mystic Shot. It's just not, it's not going to get through. Now, what we're looking for here is Mystic Shot targeting Legion Grenadier. Perfect. Alright, so he helps us get to our Gangplank. That's nice. Play the Saboteur. Now we should be guaranteed the trigger. So that's the good news. And our health total is still fairly high, so we aren't at high risk right now. Oh, maybe we will play Gangplank then. With a Noxian Fervor, that does change the dynamic somewhat. Like, I'm aware of the fact that he's probably going to die this turn.
Everything's in place. Boom.
But we're going to get value out of the keg. One way or another. Alright, well, there's our value out of the keg. Now the question is, so if we do that, he drops to 4. That is pretty low. Yeah, that's better than playing control. We're not a control deck. We really aren't. So we take, what, 3, 6, 7?
Damn it.
7 damage. I think we can work with that. Okay, drawing more cards. 7 drops us to 11. We're not that close to dead. Ezreal is still 4 away from leveling. That's wild. Yeah, I can't really play Gangplank's parlay, can I? Because he... So, I want to play parlay right now to level up Gangplank. That would be ideal. But, chances are he has Ravenous Flock. And so that will kill in response. Okay, so... That's unfortunate, but not game-ending by any stretch of the imagination.
One shot,
So,
all skill.
chances are, let's see. Our best play is probably to lead on Sleep with the Fishes. That way we level this Gangplank up before it hits. I'm trying to think what he could do to kill this in response. He needs multiple removal, I think.
Fighting's a bloody business.
Alright. Gangplank's leveled. What has he got? What we are most scared of is another sentry.
I am reborn of salt and
But he
brine.
can't thermogenic to kill Gangplank, so he has to have a way to stun Gangplank.
I'll make corpses
Or
of
Mystic Shot plus something like Scorched Earth or Noxian Guillotine. We have him very low though. And we're banking a full 3 mana here, so that's pretty strong too. Ezreal is still 2 points away.
You've concerns to...
Okay.
They
Where does
don't
that
know what
put
they're
us
up
at?
against.
Not dead yet.
By their interest.
So we do this. 1 damage here, 1 damage there. Drops it to 5. And then
Hit 'em all.
drops it to 5. He
This is
blocks.
gonna hurt.
Goes to 1. He is a brave little toaster, isn't he? Now, the downside here is we're going to have to block this turn.
Raven.
This next turn. We can't let him hit with everything. I don't think. Although it is debatable.
Six.
We might be able to
I
block with everything.
promised a bloodbath.
Ooh. Well, that should probably do it. I really don't know what he could do from here. We could just block. Like, block everything. Block everything, fire, decimate. The downside with Ezreal Draven Tempo has always been that it's kind of a controlling deck in certain matchups, and it does not have any way to gain life. I love the deck, but this is one of the spots where it's in really bad shape. Because I block here, I'll take 2 down to 11. Chances that my opponent can actually kill me out of hand, fairly low. Now, it's not impossible. He could do it. Scorched Earth. Okay, so I go down to 9. That'll do 3, what he's got in his hand there. Plus 1 more, which will do 4, down to 5. It's close. So it's not impossible. That's the key here. It's not impossible. He could do it. It's not likely, but it is possible. Okay. That drops us to 6. Okay, so he's digging for something else. Could work. I think pitching the axe is probably a bad idea for him there. The axe was his best chance to kill me. I think he actually... Let's see what he does. He could have us still. So he pitched 2 of these, and he has 2 others. If he gets within 1 point of killing us without losing his hand... Okay. Oh. Alright. GG, we got there. 4-1, not bad. So, more to what I was talking about there. So, Spinning Axe is 0 mana for 1 point of damage. It's going to be pretty hard for him to beat that efficiency. So he's better pitching something else in his hand that's not going to do an equivalent amount of damage. So he can keep that open. Because if he fired that Mystic Shot at me, I would have gone down to 2 health. So all he needed was 2 spells that he could cast at burst or fast speed for what else was in his hand. So there's a good chance that since he didn't kill me there, that means he was missing what he needed. And so he should have kept the Spinning Axe and just used it to pitch something else uncastable. That probably would have been the smartest play, and our opponent might have been able to do it. That was so close, though. So, very sketchy. I think there's a decent chance he actually could have killed us with his hand, since he had the second Mystic Shot plus a Rummage. That said, didn't have it, so we'll take that, absolutely. So, yeah, not a bad way to end it. Alright, so how do we do in our matches? We went 4-1, losing to rather a weird deck, and the wins being kind of what I was hoping for. So, again, I'm sorry, this is the the 3rd time I've played this deck in On the Grind. I've played it in pretty much... so I have my original On the Grind playlist, which consists of a couple of seasons. I think that was season 3 and 4, and I played it in one of those. I forget which, probably season 4. But I played it again in season 5, and now I've played it again in season 6. So, sorry to repeat this deck so much, but this is honestly one of the most consistent aggro decks in the game. I know there's a lot of argument for discard aggro because it's been around longer. Obviously, Bilgewater didn't come in until the full release, so in beta there was no Bilgewater, so any Bilgewater aggro deck doesn't date back to then, whereas Jinx, Draven, discard aggro has always been around. It's always been a deck since the very beginning of time. But I think this deck typically outperforms discard aggro. Discard aggro can win the matchup oftentimes because of how fast it is, but this deck just has more answers for other matchups, I think, than discard aggro. Our late game is a lot better through things like Decimate, Jack, and Captain Farron, and the addition of Noxian Fervor is actually so huge for critical matchups. Like the Zoe Lee Sin game we saw, where they had the huge Dragonling and an Eye of the Dragon that was going to create more Dragonlings the following turn. I was able to both prevent their life gain from that turn's Dragonling and kill their Eye of the Dragon so they didn't get it on the next one. And yeah, I had to throw my Misfortune away for that, but that's totally fine. Preventing that much life gain, that was that 7 points? It was like 6 to 7 points of life gain that I prevented from them. Like, that is so huge. And Noxian Fervor is really good for that. It's also great into the Fiora matchups because you can kill whatever Fiora is attacking to either kill Fiora, which would be great, or just blast their Nexus instead, which can often be against Fiora decks that you can usually get a lot of damage in early, and that extra 3 damage can be the difference between them winning and you winning. So, can be really critical. And discard aggro typically doesn't run Noxian Fervor. It's a lot harder to get away with Noxian Fervor in a deck where most of your things have 1 health, 1 to 2 health. So, this deck, I think, just tends to outperform it, just to be honest. And I'm not entirely sure how I feel on decisive aggro in the meta right now. It was pretty good into go hard, so the lack of go hard is sort of like an indirect nerf to decisive aggro. Now there is a lot of mid range, and that is the matchup where decisive aggro tends to be a bit better because you can go a little bit slower and be fine. But there's a lot of Zoe combo-y decks in the meta right now, and I think those are pretty bad for decisive aggro. I think it's going to struggle a bit against Zoe decks, so this deck I think is much better positioned for that, and I think it showed it in spades today. It's hard to say if you should expect that every time, but I mean, we rolled over those Zoe decks, and I think we got a little bit lucky, but again, they have so little removal in the early game that we can get away with a lot. And usually if they trade some of those early units, I mean, the Demacia version is going to be much better in the matchup because they're going to have a ton of life gain because they also have Star Shaping, they also have Sunforger, but they're also going to have the whole Spacey Sketcher, Starry Scamp package that's going to be really strong, and they're going to have the combat spells, so that deck should do a little bit better than, say, the Zoe Lee Sin deck, which isn't going to usually run stuff like Star Shaping, and obviously isn't going to have Sunforger. Not to mention, Plaza can be really good for them to kill our units without us losing, or without them losing stuff, which, as you saw in the Riven Quinn matchup, that deck is not great. It's neat, and it might be better than the Riven Lucian deck that I was playing around with. I like what I saw of the Quinn, and it's kind of like a second House Spider effect, so I could definitely see that being good, but that deck is still not going to be great. I'm pretty confident of that. I don't think Go Hard is really what held it back from being good, so I think it's still going to be a pretty mediocre to bad deck, but we can lose games. It happens. Sometimes they draw well, we draw poorly. I think it does demonstrate how problematic Plaza decks can be for us, but generally speaking, I don't think they'll be as bad as that matchup, because Noxus gives them access to House Spider, and most Plaza decks aren't going to be running Noxus. They're going to be running Targon, or they're going to be running Bilgewater for the typical Grand Navigator Plaza Scouts versions, and those versions we should be able to get under them a fair amount. Again, Targon Plaza, we rolled over that deck, but that does seem like a matchup that should be kind of rough because of Sunforger, because of Star Shaping, but they should have plenty of early game stuff to do. So either my opponent had a bad hand, or bad luck, or they kept a bad hand. Or they just played it wrong, but I really highly doubt it. I doubt that they pulled something like Serpent or Charger, and they were just holding it off that Starry Sketcher. They probably had to pick something really medium like Crescent Strike, and we were open attacking every turn, so they didn't get to use something like that. So I think they just got pretty unlucky. I could see that matchup being pretty problematic, but again, the fact that we're so fast and we have these great late game finishers and Decimate, Jack, and even Gangplank can, but Captain Farron as well, that addition is what makes us hold up a lot better than certain other decks. And really, I think this might be a good answer for a lot more Zoe in the meta. We saw a decent bit, only 2 games in the end, but we saw a decent bit of Zoe today. I'm pretty happy too that we got a diverse 5-game showing for the most part. Yes, we had 3 Plaza decks, but they were all kind of different in their own route. Obviously Riven Quinn's very different, but I mean, even Zoe Soul Plaza and Shyvana Soul Plaza I think are very different decks. Like, one is much more Dragons focused, and the other one is much more obviously kind of Zoe combo-y, Celestial focus. So they are 2 fairly different decks that I think play pretty different. Obviously the Shyvana one just tries to kind of build up a good board presence and grind the opponent out, whereas Targon Plaza is much more flash in the pan combo, play a bunch of stuff early, punch in a bunch of damage, and then just win with 1 Great Beyond in the late game. So they are pretty different decks, so I'm glad we got a good spread of decks. We didn't see any control, but as I've mentioned a number of times in meta chat, control's not really in a good spot right now. Even I don't have the courage to go back and try peak control again. Now, I don't even think it's in that bad of a shape, peak control. I think that could work semi-well, but Zoe's kind of a problem for a deck like that, so I think it's not really a good time to be playing control, and that's something I hope they fix. The combo decks are a little bit too powerful to control, I think, right now. Lee Sin's always a problem. I really hope they just run back the... I love Lee Sin. I love the new Lee Sin and how he works. I'll admit, I loved that deck when it first came out, but it's been such a bugbear to the format that they really should just roll back the changes at this point just to get rid of him. But I don't think he's necessarily the biggest problem. I think the big problem is Zoe. I think Zoe's too potent for what she is, and this is why I went back to a familiar deck with Bilgewater Burn, as well as the fact that since someone asked me what I thought the best aggro deck was in the format, and I said that I thought it was this deck, I wanted to kind of put my money where my mouth was and actually try out the deck and see if that was accurate, and I think I am fairly confident with that. I'm surprised we didn't see Fiora Shen. I'm kind of expecting that deck to make a big push. I could also see Zoe Fiora being pretty good too, but I think Fiora Shen could definitely pop up in the meta a lot more, and that's kind of a matchup where we can do decently once you know what you're doing with Bilgewater Burn, because Noxian Fervor can be so critical against their deck for basically avoiding the Fiora loss, and you should be able to grind them out quick so that their mid-range plan doesn't work that well. But Spirit's Refuge does add complications for that. But all in all, I think this deck's in a pretty decent spot. I think it's good if you like aggro, or if you just want quick matches. I was getting a bit tired of most decks I was playing was like 10-minute plus matches for every game, which is a little frustrating when you're trying to grind a bit, and I haven't had nearly as much time to grind with all the stuff going on in my life right now, so I've been kind of hoping for a faster deck, and this delivered in spades. So definitely a good deck if you're looking for quick matches, or if you just like playing aggro, or you're trying to beat Zoe. I think this is a decent way to do it, so I highly recommend it. I've played the deck a lot, I've talked about it to death, but it's still a fun aggro deck that is very, very powerful. So thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment below, and subscribe for more videos just